have to understand that people who think like that, who have a heavy remorse after the facts, right? They don't usually last in law enforcement.
A California police officer sends multiple text messages denigrating black people, and they come to light after he shoots a black man. We talked to former police sergeant Derrick Levasseur about what the messages mean for the ongoing lawsuit against the city and why issues like this need to be addressed in the public eye. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. This is a really terrible story that you never want to hear. A police officer in San Jose, California, who was involved in a controversial shooting last year, is now off the job after all of these highly racist text messages have come out. So going back to March of 2022, downtown San Jose, it's reported that this massive fight breaks out at this restaurant, a taqueria, and officers respond. And then Officer Mark McNamara, who is white, shoots 20-year-old football player Keon Green, who is black. Green had been holding a gun. Now, after being shot 4 times, luckily Green survived, and it turns out that Green wasn't even the aggressor. No, the investigation revealed that he had actually disarmed a person at this restaurant who was drunk and had a gun, wanted to fight Green. So he disarms him, walks outside, and officers scream for Green to put the gun down, and then he gets shot by McNamara. Now, Green ends up filing a federal lawsuit against McNamara, the police department, the city, saying that he didn't have time to follow the officer's instructions before McNamara started shooting and that McNamara used excessive force. Green was actually a standout high school football player who was playing in college as well. He had hopes of someday entering the NFL, but given his injuries, that has been put into question. Now, the department's police chief, this is what we want to talk about, Anthony Mata, says that McNamara was being investigated by Internal Affairs on an unrelated matter, and that is when they discovered a trove of text messages that the chief has described as disgusting, and as you will hear, they are. And they were discovered, and these texts arguably show racial bias. And now McNamara has resigned from the department. I want to get into what he allegedly wrote, but to do that, let me bring in a special guest. We're joined right now, might have recognized him, the big winner from Big Brother, Derrick Levasseur, private investigator, former police sergeant, detective, founder of Break Investigative Group, author of The Undercover Edge, and host of Crime Weekly Pod and Detective Perspective, joins us now. Derrick, good to see you. I mean, you have a nicer background than me. I should have second-guessed this interview now that I'm looking at it, but gosh, looks fantastic in the back.
Oh, yeah, I mean, listen, you're bringing out a pro here. You know, I'm in your world. I'm a YouTuber too, man. I'm out there. So we gotta look professional. And I'm never going to escape the Big Brother thing. 10 years later, it's still following me.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing. It's a good claim to fame.
No, I'm glad to be here. I wish it was under better circumstances.
I do too, because here's the thing. I'm going to go through this. I want to give a warning to everybody. This is not easy for me to read. Okay. I'm saying that right now. And I'm going to bleep out a lot of this stuff, but it's important to go through it. So there are these text messages where McNamara seemingly references the shooting. In a message dated the day after the shooting, McNamara allegedly writes, N-word wanted to carry a gun in the Wild West. Not on my watch. Another message said, just out here clapping fools. Green's lawyer has said that that is a slang term for shooting gangsters. McNamara also allegedly wrote, I hate black people. And then during the time when he was being interviewed by the city attorney, McNamara texted, I'm white, he's black, he's going to win. It's basically a kangaroo court. What do you make of that, Derrick?
It's terrible. It's terrible. As a former police officer, it's not only a stain on the San Jose Police Department, but law enforcement in general. And we're constantly fighting this battle every day to try and gain back the trust of the community. And instances like this do not help that situation. But to go back to what we're originally here to talk about with this shooting, you know, I've been in a shooting, and in that moment, it's a split-second decision, and it's not a lot of training that goes into it. It's a lot of who you are as a person and what you believe and what experiences you've had in life. And to say that McNamara's preconceived notions about a particular race, his biases, could have played a role in his decision to pull the trigger is completely fair. It's absolutely fair. And I think that Green's attorney has a great argument against him. I think McNamara's got some big issues going forward, and they're probably going to get a big payout at the end of all this.
That he's just a racist, but did the didn't break protocol,
Possible.
didn't engage in excessive force. That's a possibility, but
It's
I'm going to read it.
possible.
Let me tell you what I think complicates it just a tad, okay?
Yeah, well, you're the attorney, so you would know.
I don't need to be an attorney to go through what I'm about to tell you because
Fair.
seems to me there are more messages here, right? So he is deposed in this lawsuit, and parts of this deposition are released. Here's a sample of it.
I can't live my life saying, well, now that it's been, over a year, almost 2 years, and we have all of these facts, I can't go back and say, man, I made the wrong decision. I didn't make the wrong decision. I took the totality of the circumstances, and I acted to the best of my training and knowledge and ability. And, I think if you look into my file, you'll see that I've used force many times, 0 IA complaints, right? Because it's always been necessary. I always do what I have to do.
And then he also says that he would say sorry to Green if he had the chance to. However, in private text exchanges, days after giving this deposition, he writes, "The other day, this N-word lawyer is like, Mr. McNamara, we can still find you guilty of excessive force, right?" I'm like, yeah, then what happens? Nothing. Cool. Because I'm pretty sure the district attorney would have charged me if I used excessive force, but she didn't because I didn't use excessive force. Think I give an F what you all N-word think? I'll shoot you too. Ah! And then he writes, there was like 65 African-looking mother effers there too, all just mean mugging me and taking notes. They should all be bowing to me and bringing me gifts since I saved a fellow, you know what the word is, by making him rich as F. Otherwise, he would have lived a life of poverty and crime. So now I think that complicates what this shooting is about.
Oh, as far as what his notions were going into it, like as far as making it worse for him, right?
You tell me. Yep.
Oh, 100%. 100%. That's what I'm talking about. It's one of those situations where if these text messages were 5 years after the shooting, you could argue that maybe something happened in that time period where his perspective on a certain group of individuals had changed, right? But he's saying this the day after the shooting. So I don't think it's a far leap to say that he's going into the situation, this shooting, with those ideas about those certain people.
Well, I think that's a problem. He's saying it after even the deposition, where he's in one way he's defending himself in the dedeposition, but he's also saying, I'm sorry for what happened. This kind of looks like nothing he said is credible, right?
Oh, 100%. No, 100%. And I'll tell you what, not to kind of bounce around here, there's even a bigger issue for me as a former police officer, as someone who was in an administrative role. From what I understand, these conversations were going on amongst a former police officer and a current police officer who is now on administrative leave.
Correct.
What are those guys doing? How are they engaging in that conversation and allowing it to take place? And I think that's what speaks to the larger issue here. Is it's this idea that even though if you didn't say it, you're okay. No, honestly, this other officer that's on administrative leave, the fact that wasn't reported immediately and this had to come up through an internal investigation, that officer should be gone as well. And the other issue with this, which Green's attorney brought up, is the fact that McNamara resigned. So technically, which I would hope would never happen, he could go to another police department and be hired again because he's still certified through the police academy. And that's why Green's attorney is calling for him to be decertified as a police officer so that can't happen. Because again, he wasn't fired. He resigned because, as you were reading the text messages, it's pretty obvious what happened here and where his mindset is, and that he shouldn't have been a police officer in the first place. But there's a bigger issue here, and it doesn't appear to be an isolated incident to just this one guy. It seems like other people knew about McNamara, knew what his opinions were, and at minimum just ignored it.
A lot of things to break down there. Yeah. So yes, the people who received the messages, it's a question, why didn't they come forward? What did they say in response? I think that's a fair
100%.
question. How difficult is it to decertify an officer? Can it be just from these text messages alone?
100%. Absolutely. And I think if he had been fired, it would have automatically took into effect, where you're fired based on, well, again, I guess he could make an argument from a civil perspective where he was unjustly fired, right? But that's a different conversation. I think if he's terminated under these circumstances, he would automatically lose his certification. But the fact that he resigned, he technically still has it. Now, again, I don't think any police department would touch him with a 10-foot pole, but that doesn't change the fact that technically, in the eyes of the policy, he still could be a police officer somewhere else. It's a big problem. And I think the best thing they can do, San Jose right now, is what they've done so far, which is immediate action. I know that the union has come out and said that if these allegations are true, there's no place for this in law enforcement. That's what they're supposed to do, right? But
by the way, that's a big thing for them to come out and say that, the police association, because usually
you think
they would
so, though? I mean, after those text messages,
well, not after the text messages, but in general, they would defend a police officer in a shooting like this normally, right? But when these messages come out, they've turned on them.
You got to separate yourself immediately, because as I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, there's a bigger issue in our society where there's a lack of trust within law enforcement amongst the community, and unfortunately, one officer's actions can affect an entire profession. That's just the world we're in. Because in fairness to the people who are driving around on a daily basis getting stopped by police officers, how do they know? How do they differentiate between the good and the bad ones? We're all wearing the same uniform. So I understand where they're coming from as a civilian now myself. Like, there are times where I get pulled over and they don't know who I am. And I've had some bad encounters too, where the officer, maybe not to this extreme, I've never experienced something like this, but the officer, frankly, is not a good person. For whatever reason, were they having a bad day that day, or is that just who they are? And I sit there and think, wow, look at the way I look and how they're treating me. Imagine if you're in a different situation in a socioeconomical area that's maybe not as up and coming. How do they treat them? And as a police officer, there were times, not that I seen anything racially motivated, but I would see times where, as a supervisor, an officer was less than courteous to the people they were dealing with, even the people we were arresting. And I can say this publicly because anybody who worked for me or worked with me knows this to be true. That officer got called out immediately when we got to the station and reprimanded immediately. I had no tolerance for it. I was a police officer in the community where I grew up. So people knew if you were out there talking to someone and I was present, my family lives in that community still. My parents still live there. So everyone, regardless of why we were encountering them, they were to be treated with respect. And I think that's the best thing we can do here in this situation, San Jose and law enforcement as a whole, is condemn these actions, call them out immediately, and completely eradicate McNamara and any of the people that were involved in this conversation from the law enforcement community immediately.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And look, I hate talking about these cases because I'm always trying to, I'm a pro law enforcement guy, but I think it's also, you have to call out the bad ones to recognize the good ones. I think this certainly complicates the legal case, because for the defense, they seem to be all one together. The city, the police department, McNamara. Now, the city's no longer representing McNamara. So now he's going to have to get his own counsel. I understand that the judge wants to meet with the attorneys to discuss how this is actually going to affect the case. I imagine it's going to complicate his defense. Again, he could probably say, look, yeah, I got racist notions. I've said terrible things, but it didn't affect in that moment what I was thinking, how I was responding. And just to go to that shooting, I do want to go a little bit more to the messages. But going more to the shooting itself, I don't know if you saw the way it went down or
the video
what happened. Yeah, but apparently his body cam hadn't been on. There was an allegation that he had been working 2 shifts, that he was tired, that this is a split of a second kind of thing. Even if he goes this it alone, he has his own counsel. How successful would he be in saying this wasn't excessive force?
Okay, let's take away everything we know about McNamara and just look at the video from what we can see. And again, perspective is everything. Again, the perspective that we're seeing it at, we're not seeing Green come out of the building. We're just seeing McNamara, that's the only view that I've seen, where he's on the staircase or something like that, and he's shooting into the direction of the camera. As officers, we're brought into a situation where we don't know what we're walking into. Okay, so if there's no bias there, and you're walking into this apartment, you know that you're there for some type of disturbance, and someone walks out with a gun in their hand, you have a split second to make a decision. It's going to be your life or theirs, potentially. The question I have, and I wasn't able to get this answer, maybe you can shed some light on it, was Green's back turned to them when he exited the building, or was he facing them with the gun pointing in their direction? That is a big difference. And I ask that because if his back was turned to them, how would they have even seen the gun in the first place? And that's why I'm saying perspective matters, and why McNamara's body cam would have been so huge in this situation.
I will tell you, my understanding is multiple officers had said drop the gun, but he was the only one that actually fired, which is a very big indicator. I will tell you, now that these messages have come out, Green's lawyer, Adante Pointer, has said Officer McNamara should be criminally prosecuted He should be led into court in handcuffs facing an attempted murder charge. The United States Attorney's Office should also be looking into this unlawful, unwarranted, unjustified, and apparently premeditated attempted murder and looking at this as a hate crime for what Officer McNamara attempted to do and did do to Mr. Green. Now, I agree, these messages cannot be more disgusting. They are coming out at a terrible time for him, legally speaking, if he's trying to defend his actions. But is it enough to say that this is a hate crime? Is it enough to say that this is attempted murder and that this is actually criminal? You tell me.
Oh, I'm not a lawyer, but I have unfortunately gone through a situation like this. Like I said, I was involved in a shooting in 2007 in Rhode Island. When a police officer is involved in a shooting, regardless of how it may look, there is a grand jury hearing in Rhode Island. So I had to go through a grand jury hearing. I was cleared in 8 minutes. That's how clear cut my shooting was. But regardless of the situation, you're brought in front of a jury of your peers, and they decide whether or not you should be indicted on any charges, right? So I can't speak to San Jose and how it's in California, but I know in Rhode Island there is a grand jury hearing, and I don't think if that process had already taken place, whatever their process is to allow him to come back to full duty, I don't know if there's a double jeopardy thing there.
Look, for me, the most concerning thing about this is racial bias in any case, in any job, is terrifying. But when you're dealing with somebody who could potentially end someone else's life, has the ability to use deadly force, that is what is so concerning to me. And I completely understand his lawyer's perspective to try to get justice here. I just don't know. I mean, it could be, he fires. He's the only one that fires. He has these clearly racist inclinations. He says things right afterwards. I wouldn't be surprised if he's ultimately criminally charged in this case. And I wouldn't be surprised, as you said, you think there's going to be a settlement here? Like, I don't know at this point, after all these messages, would the city still try to defend this? Would the police department try to defend this? Would they, I don't know, maybe try to isolate themselves from McNamara, settle on their own, and then would the lawsuit move against McNamara alone? I'm not sure. I just think that these text messages changed the whole game.
The text messages changed the whole game, and you said a lot there. So it's, first off, I definitely think, I don't think it's a leap. This is my opinion. I'll speak on behalf of myself. I definitely think that going into that situation, the fact that McNamara was the only one to shoot, I don't think it's a far leap to say that he's sitting on that stairwell, that porch area. He sees a black man come out with a gun, and his immediate response is, this guy's going to kill me. And he shoots. And no, like you said, nobody else did. I don't think that's a far leap. And what's really concerning to me is, think about what we're talking about here. This guy said this in a text message. What is he saying just in his everyday life that's not being recorded? Think about that. Think about how disgusting these text messages are. What do you think he's saying amongst his friends and the people that he's close with on a daily basis? So I definitely agree with everything you said. I absolutely think he could be charged in this situation, depending on how the judicial process works out there. I don't exactly know, but if he can be still tried with this, which is obviously statute of limitations, that wouldn't be a problem. I definitely think he could be charged, and he probably will be. As far as the civil element of it, I do have some questions about it, because he was a police officer when it occurred. And you obviously, again, I don't know how San Jose is, but there's a Bill of Rights here in Rhode Island. You're protected under that, where you have union representation. I know that the union has come out and publicly said, hey, listen, we don't condone this. If he's involved in it, if this is true, he should be let go. But does he still have protection from that union from a legal perspective? Because at the time of the incident, he was an active police officer working under a professional capacity. Would he still be entitled to legal representation paid for by the union, even if they don't agree with it? That's a question I have.
That's a good question. I think the court has to settle that. My understanding, at least at the time of this recording, is they're going to have a hearing to determine what happens now. I'll just, from my perspective, looking at this is also going to, even if this were to, go to a trial, and I know that the federal trial is going to happen, I think in February 2024. We'll see if criminal charges, there is going to be a back and forth between one expert saying he acted reasonably, he acted under protocol, and you're going to have other experts saying this was excessive force. It's just a really disturbing new detail in a case like this. And thankfully, Mr. Green survived, and hopefully he can fully recover and have a career that he wants. Derrick Levasseur,
I think he's still playing football.
Yeah, he is. He is. And he wants to get to the NFL. Hopefully he can. But, look, it's just a really unfortunate situation. Derrick Levasseur, so great speaking to you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Likewise.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.